Hey guys, in this video I want to show you how I painted Magnus the Red's skin tone. So this is a bit of a personal project for me, I suppose, because the skin tone was the reason this project was delayed for a number of years. So I got this model as a Christmas present, I think in 23, but it could have been 24, and it sat unpainted. I built it quite quickly, but it sat unpainted for what felt like a couple of years, right? Just gathering dust. And the main reason, the main thing that delayed this project was just figuring out how to even begin painting a red/magenta skin. Obviously, it's not a colour skin tone that crops up that often at all, so it's not like you get a lot of practice painting this. And this is certainly not the model that you want to test on, mainly because it's a centerpiece model, but also because it's not the cheapest thing going, that's for sure. So eventually, again, it might have been last year, end of last year, beginning of this year, I thought, no, it's been enough time, let's try and tackle this. So I went into the bits box, got a few giant or ogre heads from Warhammer Fantasy Battle kits, and began painting some test pieces. Eventually I settled on something that I was happy with and ended up painting this model in front of you. So yeah, in this video I want to show you the technique I used to get the skin tone pictured here, but as you could probably well imagine, I'm in no rush to repaint this model, and I'm certainly not going to buy a second kit because it's not, as I said, not the cheapest thing going. So in lieu of a second Magnus kit, we have Magnus the Red at home. So the idea here is to use an Ogre Kingdoms model because there's lots of exposed skin and muscle that will be perfect to demonstrate this technique. And this is a figure I picked up specifically for this video as an eBay purchase. And while I was cleaning the model up, removing mold lines and what have you, I thought, no, let's also pose him like Magnus the Red, because I am too much of a cheapskate to buy a second Magnus model. What I thought is the least I can do. You'll notice there's no wings on this figure because I am in no rush to ever paint Magnus's wings ever again in my life. Painting the original set there made my eyes go funny. So this is just going to focus on the skin tone, and I might also cover the hair as well towards the end of the video. So without further waffling, let's get this guy undercoated. And there we go. Right, so he's undercoated grey, and the paints we're going to need in this video, at least as far as the skin tone is concerned, is Stormvermin Fur, Nuln Oil, Dawnstone, Administratum Grey, White Scar, and then Doomfire Magenta. Now the first step, and this might seem somewhat counterintuitive considering we've just sprayed in grey, is to base coat his skin in Stormvermin Fur. Now if you did have a darker grey spray paint, you could probably skip this stage, but we need to build up to lighter tones, and my grey spray is pretty light already. Effectively what we're doing here is pre-shading, and I'm going to take the opportunity to kind of update my pre-shading video which I did a few years ago. So we're going to paint all of his highlights, all of his skin and muscle texture before applying the final colour. So not much to this. I'm just going to paint all of his skin with the Stormvermin Fur, and see you in a sec. Okay, so with the Stormvermin dry, we're going to now move on to Nuln Oil and basically wash all the skin in the black wash, just to add even further shading into the recesses. So again, not a complicated stage. You don't need to watch me do this. I'll see you in a sec. So with that dry, we're going to go back to the Stormvermin Fur and pick out all of the muscles. So I'm going to leave some of the recesses obviously darker, like the Nuln Oil there. Broadly speaking, pick out all the muscle. So you're leaving kind of, I guess, a border of the Nuln Oil stage between each major muscle. So let's try the back. So I'm going to pick out this. I've got no idea what these different muscles are called. So I'm going to try and leave a darker line between those two groups. Again there. Right, so the thing about pre-shading is you put an awful lot of work into the initial stage, these stages, and then when you add the colour it's pretty straightforward because it says you've already done the hard graft here. And there we go. So as you can see, there's sort of darker recesses now, but pretty much everything is back to being storm vermin. If I can get the camera on it. I've also picked out the details in his face. So the next step is to add some Dawnstone into the storm vermin. So we're going to mix up both of these, so equal parts. Add a little bit of water, right, and we're going to start applying some sort of directional top-down highlights to some of the muscle work. So this is pretty much all going to be coated, this top bit here. So if you think about like the light is coming from directly above him, which in actual fact it is, you can see the shadow there of something above me. And I'm going to just highlight the tops of all of these muscles. So we've still got another few highlights to go, so I'm going to bring it down to just below the middle section there. So we're covering most of it with this mix. A bit more water to it. It's quite a warm day actually. Picking out these bits. I'll probably bring this down so you can see how far I've brought that paint down, because we said we've got another few layers to go, so it gives us the room to then stop the subsequent layers further and further up. So let's have a look at the front. You can get away with a few mistakes doing this because the final layer will cover some of it, but try and be as careful as you can be when you're highlighting muscle work and whatnot. So with that done, we can now move on to a layer of Dawnstone. And from here on out, we're going to change the way we layer the paints on the model slightly. I'm just going to add a little bit of water into the Dawnstone on the palette. So what we're going to do is lots and lots of little lines, and this is a bit of a crappy brush to begin with, because it doesn't really matter at this stage, and I'll move on to some finer brushes in a sec. But effectively, rather than just paint the entire area, we're going to layer it up with lots and lots of lines. So it might mean that the top becomes almost completely Dawnstone, but it's because we've done lots and lots of little lines. Some of those lines might merge over into some of the darker areas, which is fine because it just helps us blend a little bit. But yeah, lots and lots of little lines. Still trying to stick to the areas that would see the light if your light was directly above you. I'm using this brush because it's kind of like sprayed out a little bit, which actually helps when you're painting lots of little lines. try and do some more of the back. So if you need to change direction on the lines, then so be it. You might be sort of crisscrossing them. For things like the face and the knuckles, we need to start then picking out the details of his jowls and nose and what have you. Let me carry on with this, then I might swap to a better brush. Okay, bit by bit he's getting there. We're going to now move on to a mix of Administratum Grey with Dawnstone. This is a 50-50 mix. And we're getting to the point where the layers, they're not that different from one another, but that's kind of the point of pre-shading, that we do all that work early on. And it improves the final result. So just like we were doing last time, it's lots of little lines to build that highlight up, and we're going to leave some of the previous Dawnstone visible, so we're not going to completely cover it with this 50-50 mix. Add a little bit of water to the palette. Again, if you need to change up the direction of the lines, then absolutely fine. The whole point of this is to give the skin some texture, so it's not just a flat colour. And then things like the hands, sure it's in focus. The hands, you can start picking out the sort of the veins in the skin. This model actually has a couple to follow, but if it doesn't, I suggest painting sort of like little wiggly lines to emulate that, especially in some of the darker areas. So yeah, try and pick out the face a little. His own hand is throwing his face into shade there a little bit. But now I did trim this ogre's mustache off, probably not perfectly, but all this is just a very, very careful job of picking out the detail, and then for the rest of the skin tone, so just lots and lots of little lines, highlights with lines. Okay, so we can now move on to using the Administratum Grey straight out the pot, where I will add a touch of water to it. Again, same principle, but just less and less area now being covered. Lots and lots of little lines. We'll start building up a bit of a texture. You can go back and pick out those sort of veins you were doing. Something that will roughly still be visible once the contrast paint goes over top. You can also highlight any sort of creases or wrinkles in the skin as well. I tend to check that the camera's in focus first. I tend to just try and pick out the knuckles on the fingers. And again with those veins. Okay, so only a couple more things to do now before we can finally start applying some colour to the model. We're going to mix some white scar into the Administratum grey, and for this stage you're going to need not only your fine detail brush but a scrap of sponge as well. So let's set the pot to do that. So just like we've been doing previously, it's a 50-50 mix. I'm going to have some white and some Administratum grey, and then a little bit of water just to thin it down a tad because the white is quite a thick paint. And we're going to pick out the edges of his face, his lips and what have you, the extremities. So we're going to pick out the edges of his knuckles. I said highlight any of those veins that you just want to stand out a little bit. Some of the obvious folds in the skin and wrinkles can get final sort of like highlight. And then what we're going to do is use the sponge. So I've just got scrap bit of sponge, and we're going to stipple some, I'm going to say skin texture, I guess, to some of the muscle work. Be a bit random in the application because again skin isn't always a uniformed texture and colour and what have you. So I don't want to go overboard with it. But it's just giving him some detail. Now, you might assume that the next step is to apply white scar on its own, and you might want to do that, but I mentioned early on I did some test pieces before painting Magnus. This is one of them. Obviously this is a giant head, and I highlighted all the way up to white before putting the Doomfire on. And I personally feel that the highlights are far too pink. The camera isn't exactly picking up on what I'm seeing, but the rest of the skin tone is kind of blended nicely, and then you've got the white that almost looks like a neon magenta. So I'm not going to apply a white layer to this guy. We're just going to move straight on to the Doomfire magenta. Okay, so we're finally ready for the magenta wash. Now I would definitely thin this down. Contrast paints are very, very thick and kind of designed to blot out what you've done before, assuming you're just using a standard like grey undercoat. Of course what we've done is far more elaborate and put a lot more work into our grey undercoat, so we don't want to completely obscure what we've done. So for that reason the Doomfire will need to be thinned down, and when I painted Magnus properly I did 3 layers to get the final skin tone. Right, you can either use water to thin the Doomfire down, or if you have it, the Lahmian medium is a specifically designed paint thinner for Citadel paint, so that's what I'm going to use. So there's that. There's the Lahmian medium. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get the pipette, Right, and let's put it in his nose. There we go. Right, so with this, I would err on the side of caution. It's better to put a layer of wash on that's too thin, because you can always make it thicker with subsequent washes, than one that's too thick that you can't do anything about. So this is a very, very thin layer. Let's bring it into focus. There we are. And the one thing you do need to avoid, you see how it's all pulling into the recesses here. Doomfire Magenta will dry like quite a solid bright red if you let it pull like this. So we just need to make sure that it's spread out thin, that you're not letting it pull into the recesses, because it's just better to do several thin coats to get that magenta finish, than have like some of the areas that we've spent time kind of shading and building up just turning like a solid bright red. So just like that in the fingers. Nope, nope, nope. So yeah, you want a very, very thin layer. And as I said, this at the beginning of the video, this is I mentioned this is going to be a replacement for my pre-shading video. This is pre-shading. This is what the technique is called. You know, contrast paints have kind of been designed to help people pre-shade over like a solid grey undercoat. But what we're doing here, I suppose, is taking it a little bit further. Alright, there we go. That's the first layer dry. As I said, I did 3, so let's give it the second coat. Luckily our wash is still wet, but I don't trust it, because obviously, I don't know, it's been 20 minutes, half an hour, so it's probably dried to some extent. I'd rather err on the side of caution. So let's add a little bit more Lahmian medium to it. Just thin it down. So, not much to it. Right, so that's layer number 2 dry. Let's mix up a fresh batch of Doomfire, I guess. So, a little bit of Lahmian medium. Let's go in the middle now. And then a little bit of Doomfire. Yep, don't want that pooling there. So I know the official paint job for Magnus the Red, his hands and feet sort of blend more into a purple, but because this figure had sat unpainted for so long, and I had been, you know, putting off this project for months, years, what have you. By the time I got started with it and mucking around with testing different skin tones for the magenta, I was in no mood to then work out how you would blend it nicely into a purple, especially when like the top layer is just a wash with loads of pre-shading. I thought if they get that wrong and don't blend it nicely into the purple, then I have to pre-shade the whole lot again. So and the model was quite complicated as it is, with like white cloth and various metallics and obviously all the feathers. I just got to the point with Magnus where I went, no, I'm happy with him being the same universal magenta. I don't want to muck around with this anymore. You know, 9 out of 10 is better than pushing for perfection and then ruining it all. The Emperor's Children taught us that much. Okay, so that's layer number 3 all dry. Let's compare him to the real one. So I think the mini Magnus's skin is a little bit lighter, so I could probably get away with another very thin wash. And again, as I was saying, I'd rather err on the side of caution and do a few thin washes than one thick one that kind of you can't do anything about once it's on and dry. But for the purpose of this video, I think he's done. I don't think I need to put another layer on. You understand the technique. I'm not going to go through and tell you how to paint all the rest of his armor and equipment and what have you, because I know I've done a few hour-long painting tutorials recently, so I don't want to keep bombarding the channel with some real lengthy videos to chew through. That being said, a lot of the things like gold and what have you, that I have separate videos covering those sorts of techniques, so if you are interested you can have a look. I will, however, paint his hair in this video because I don't think slightly reddy brown hair is ever going to crop up again, so I might as well bolt it on to this. So to paint Magnus's hair, we're going to need Rhinox hide, Khorne Red, Screaming Skull, and Agrax Earthshade. And the first step is to coat his hair, cover his hair in a base coat of Rhinox hide. So nothing really to it. Just need to paint it brown. Alright, so that done, we're now going to paint the hair with Khorne Red, so just give it a pretty solid base. The brown is there really to hide some mistakes, because if you don't get the red in literally every part, it's better that it is brown than grey. But yeah, just need to coat this with the Khorne Red. Okay, next up we're going to wash the hair with some Agrax Earthshade. Now, Agrax Earthshade, if you turn it upside down and you can see any of the pigment still at the bottom of the pot, you need to give it a really good shake. If you don't, and there's loads of pigment at the bottom of the pot, what you potentially end up with is a shiny layer of Agrax Earthshade, as you don't have enough pigment to balance out the, I don't know, the binding agent or whatever else it's made of. So just a bit of a tip there. Not much to this, we just need to coat his hair in Agrax. Right, so with the wash dry, we're now going to mix some Rhinox hide together with some Khorne Red. So, have a bit of Rhinox hide. It's a bit of a 50-50 mix. We're just darkening the Khorne Red. Right. And then we're going to get the tiniest bit of Screaming Skull. Just add that in. So it's kind of like a wine red, I guess. That's what I'm going to call it. And then, if we ensure his hair is in focus, we're just going to brush over. So similar to how you might dry brush. I'm just going to brush over all his hair to pick out those highlights. If there's any of that in focus, we'll find out come editing. Alright, and then we're just going to get a little bit more bleach bone, Screaming Skull, sorry, I'm showing my age, and add a bit more of a lighter highlight to it. And then depending on when you're happy with the hair, let's just make a little bit more and add a little bit more Screaming Skull. Right, so not a particularly impressive technique, if I'm honest. I didn't spend a huge amount of time painting Magnus's hair on the official model, but that is, I believe, roughly what I did. So yeah, I think now let's finish this guy so we can at least finish the video with him done, and yeah, call it a day. And there we go. That's Mini Magnus all done. I did end up putting a 4th layer of Doomfire Magenta over the skin. I wasn't happy with the final finish. I did put 3 layers over the main Magnus model, but I must have watered down the Doomfire a little bit too much in this video, so yeah, I just added a 4th. If you're doing this yourself, it is better to do more thin coats, as I said, because if I had not thinned them down enough and I just slapped Doomfire Magenta straight over, then we would have ruined all of our pre-shading. So it is better to thin it down maybe too much, and then because you can always add another layer. So if we look at them side by side, I barely tell a difference really. I mean, if I was to field the one on the right on a tabletop, I don't think my opponent could ever complain. I suppose he doesn't have wings, so there is that difference at least. But yeah, I know if there is interest in doing a tutorial video on Magnus's wings or Magnus's armor, I'm happy to sort of look into that. I have to say, painting Magnus's wings was just complete, like, winging it from start to finish. I knew roughly the colours I wanted to use, and I could probably remember the different layers I've applied, but there was so much trial and error that I'd have to really think about how I painted those feathers to do a tutorial. Again, really depends if there's the interest following this video. As for the armour, if anyone's interested in how I did the armour, the silver was basically like a lead belcher, Nuln Oil, I think a mithril silver, or was it chain? I can't remember the name of the current shiny silver, and then finished with the Tamiya metallic silver to give it that real nice shine, and the gold. The gold on Magnus's armour, there's a video on how I've been painting gold recently up within the last couple of weeks. So yeah, it's worth having a look at that if you're interested. But if you've enjoyed this video, thank you very much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. And if you can, share this with other people that are struggling to paint their Magnus the Red, that would be greatly appreciated, as it really does help the channel. But in the meantime, take it easy, and I will see you in the next one.